Hey, what's up YouTube? I fooled around with a material effect the other day for a potential use in my game and it ended up looking pretty cool. I can pixelate a texture, have a bunch of color and distortion parameters to get all sort of effects, and I thought I'd try to explain how it's made, so let's jump right into it. Here's my material function. Okay, that looks scary, but bear with me. Let's do this step by step. Alright. Here's the opacity output, and here's the emissive output of my material function. Note that the material itself is pretty straightforward. It's translucent, unlit, and is two-sided. You may also try using a masked material with desired opacity, but I personally stuck with a translucent material. The instruction count isn't that high, there are 3 texture samplers, so it's pretty cheap overall. Anyway, back into the material function. I basically split the effect into 2 parts. I have what I called good pixels and glitchy pixels. You can see that this bit of math is used in a lot of places, and this is the core of the effect. This is essentially what gives me the pixelated effect. So let's think about it. We have our texture coordinates from 0 to 1, right? Multiply it by, let's say, 16. That will give us coordinates ranging from 0 to 16. Ceil means whatever float value we have at any point is rounded to the integer above. And so we now have integer values, and so it remains 1 from here to there, 2, 3, and so on and so on. Then offset by half a unit to sample the texture at the center of each pixel, and then divide, so we are back to normalized 0, 1 coordinates. And that gives you the pixelated effect, due to the coordinates remaining a fraction of integers for a certain width, if that makes sense. Note that this will likely give you artifacts at the edge of the pixels, but you can get rid of most of them by forcing the MIP level to 0 in your texture sampler. So this is how my texture is being sampled, as you can see here. It's also used for the vignette effect to fade out the opacity on the edges, so I can have a per pixel radial gradient instead of a smooth radial gradient. Speaking of the vignette effect, this lerp let me choose if I want to apply the vignette effect on all pixels or only the glitchy pixels. Up here, using a simple dot product between the camera vector and the vertex normal, I fade out the opacity when the effect is viewed from sideways. Down here, I use my texture coordinates at index 1 to control the opacity as well. Now, to explain this, I need to show you the mesh I'm using. Okay, it's a bunch of planes, right? The first UV map is used for regular texture mapping, but the second is used to encode the distance of each of these planes to the mesh origin. And I use that texture coordinates axis as a value to fade in the opacity. This is what gives me the gradient, right? That same value is used down there as well to fade in between 2 colors, so I can create a color gradient based on the depth. Okay, hopefully that makes sense so far. Actually, let's unplug this bit here so we can see the difference. See, no more vignette, no more depth gradient, and no more fading out based on the view angle. Let's kill the grid as well while we are at it. We'll get back to that in a moment. This is how it looks without that grid. So, okay, I have my good pixels using my little texture coordinates setup here. And I have my glitchy pixels, which is the same texture, right? But sampled using UVs distorted in all sorts of ways. I'll get over that in a minute. Here I isolate my glitchy pixels from the good pixels. I don't want to have glitchy pixels being added on top of my good pixels inside the mask, if that makes sense. Hence the subtract, so my good pixels can act as a mask. Add a little multiplier on top so I can control the opacity of my glitchy pixels. Down there I have my 2 color setup. They are both identical, right? There's one for my good pixels, one for my glitchy pixels, and both are combined. Now for the grid, let's focus on that part first. I'm using my texture coordinates multiplied by the amount of desired pixels, then using fractions so they kinda loop from 0 to 1 over and over, and then getting the maximum value from both the red and green channel to convert all that to black and white. Then we can add a smooth step to control those gradients in all sorts of ways, and that's how you create a grid. Now let's jump back into the material function to see the rest. Here's a multiply to control the grid opacity. Here, just like for the vignette effect, I can choose to hide the grid on the good pixels, and then I have some bunch of color control. Nothing too crazy. Okay, let's plug all that back in. That's pretty much it. Most of the magic happens with the distorted UVs. So let's see what we got here. Let's unplug that first, and that as well. Here I have an RGB noise texture, and I'm using those pixel values to distort my pixelated coordinates. Now to subtract by 0.5, so it's distorted in both negative and positive x and y. Now that doesn't look too good on its own, so I'm using those pixelated coordinates again to sample the noise texture, but this time I'm adding time, so essentially my noise texture will pan in both x and y. I also offset the time using the depth encoded in my texture coordinates at index 1, so the deformation at the back happens sooner than at the front, resulting in that moving forward motion. All that plugged into a bunch of multiplies, so you can tweak the values at will. And that's my first noise path. To that I'm adding a second noise path, which is my noise texture being sampled again, this time with UVs already distorted by that first noise path, and a new distortion layer added on top for even more distortion. And with all that you can get some pretty crazy distortion effects, and it kinda looks cool. Yep, that's it. To sum up, we have undistorted good pixels here, distorted glitchy pixels here, a grid, vignette effect, fade planes based on depth, fade planes based on view angle, color control down there, and UV's distortion there. Hopefully that made sense and you could learn a thing or two. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. Files are available on my Patreon in case you're interested. Speaking of Patreon, I recently added a project which explains in great details how to use the procedural mesh components in Blueprints. It showcases many examples and is greatly documented, so in case you're not yet familiar with the procedural mesh component, consider joining the Patreon and taking a look at it. Coming soon on the Patreon, a demo project showcasing a water interaction system with wave propagation, another demo project showcasing how to create Gersner waves, although I will be releasing my fade system I showcased a while ago, some more Niagara examples, a texture painter, and so many more. Plus I'm soon going to reveal the main character of my video game. It's almost done, so excited. Shout out to my latest Patreon supporters, let me butcher your names real quick: Gigos, Dono, Max Morel, and Andrew Miller. Thanks for the support, I greatly appreciate it. Alright, that's it. Consider leaving a like and subscribe if you like the content. I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one. See ya!